over here. 5 over here. Hello, and welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Star Wars 40K. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you tell the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we talk about games. But you know what? We also talk about... I don't even know. There's so many good ways to attack this from. We also talk about, you know, Zack Snyder movies. We also talk about Star Wars, which this sort of is. We
Yeah.
also just talk about, I don't know.
We did an episode on Seven Samurai, which just sort of is.
We also talk about Seven Samurai, and we did an episode on the Magnificent Seven remake, which was, it's just like there's so many angles.
Yeah.
For this. So here we are, Rebel Moon. Here's the backstory. I don't even know when Rebel Moon went into production. Maybe like 2020 or something like that. Rebel Moon started as Zack Snyder's Star Wars saga kind of pitch to Disney. The idea is that Rebel Moon was set in the Star Wars universe during the Imperial era, and it was just 7 samurai in Star Wars. That's it. That was the whole pitch. Disney said no. And so Zack Snyder essentially took the same pitch, filed the serial number off, brought it to Netflix and said, "Hey, do you guys want to make a Star Wars movie?"
Is it like filed the serials numbers off, sprinkled on a little bit of 40K, right? Like,
and they made this movie. Rebel Moon 1 and 2, the first one came out at the end of last year, the second one came out in April. They're apparently getting a director's edition or director's cut, which honestly, I'm just like, why doesn't this man just put that one out first? It's always better, right? Like, it's always better than the movie that comes out. But hey, they're doing a director's cut that is both of them in one giant, massive, like 4-hour epic. At the end of I think at the end of the year, it's like in a couple of months kind of thing.
Well, if it's 4 hours, are they just like not like 4 hours implies they're not adding anything to it? Presumably,
I guess I don't know. I actually think they're cutting stuff from it.
Okay,
My understanding is that it's all getting changed and shuffled around. I read this a long time. Don't listen to me.
Okay.
This is deeply unsourced information. I just vaguely remember reading this.
Yeah. So I googled if there were more supposed to come out, and something said that there's supposed to be 4 more if this does okay, which I guess makes some amount. Like if you do them as like each 2 are like one part of a trilogy, I get it, I guess, but because there's like a cliffhanger at the end of this movie, but.
Okay, yeah. So there's R-rated director's cuts for Rebel Moon 1 and 2. It isn't actually going to combine the two of them. So
Okay.
that was my bad.
All right. So, yeah, are they going to be 4 hours a piece, 2 hours more of each content?
Yeah, the director's cuts are releasing this summer, I am told.
All right.
So there you go. That's IGN.
Let's give our pre-spoiler impressions. Buddy, let me get how did you love it or did you adore it?
I thought it was fine.
Oh, wow.
I liked it well enough. I watched the first one twice, and the second one once, and I'll probably end up watching them again. They are movies that I had a good time. It drew my kind of like attention and focus in the way that I wanted it to. But I feel like I'm giving this a bad review by being sort of honest and saying I thought it was just fine. It wasn't like this is the movie. This is my hole. It's made for me,
Yeah.
right? And it being just okay is sort of like me saying that it's garbage.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, right? Because like, I thought the second one was better than the first one.
Mhm.
I thought like there's a lot of weakness around like some of the dialogue choices. I thought some of the storytelling was off. There were some funny things that happened. As happens with some of these, I send Buddy notes while I watch the movie. And there was some stuff that I thought was bad, but it had interesting bones, is the way I want to put it. Right? I could see a director's cut making it better. I'm not sure it could make it good. but it did hold my attention, and I want to give it credit for like doing something like this, right? Like the last space epic I can kind of remember is like Jupiter Ascending, which was also not good.
Wait, what? Not Dune?
Oh, I guess Dune count, but Dune's not really a
Oh,
space
interesting.
movie, right? Like, I mean, is this one? I don't know.
Okay, interesting. I think a lot of my stuff comes down to I'm comparing it to Dune, which I obviously love, and it like I actually think in a world where there's no Dune, I probably love these movies. Like I'm probably whole hog on these films because they took a lot of buttons that I want. Oh, whoops. They took a lot of buttons that I want to be. They flip a lot of switches that I'm like into. Um, but there's just something about like the 1-2 punch of Dune Part Two, and it's just like I don't know, it just really like drags these movies down by like the relativity effect of it, right? Just it's the Dune is so good and I love it so much. And I think Denis Villeneuve, who is obviously my favorite director, is just like a more talented director in general. He's sort of weirdly less interesting. He's a little more, he's like more conventional, right? He's more normal, is sort of what I would say. But just like, I don't know, he gets like good, straightforward, real performances. I really connected to Paul in a way that I didn't necessarily connect to characters in this film. So I don't know. There's like that stuff.
Yeah, I also think that there's like, you know how like Wes Anderson, like the more time goes on, the more Wes Anderson films resemble parodies of Wes Anderson films.
Yes, yeah,
Uh,
the Flanderization, yeah.
yeah, I feel like that's happening with like if I wanted to make a movie that was a parody of a Zack Snyder movie played, but like not played as a comedy, I might put up these movies as like a thing, right? Like all throughout the runtime, my girlfriend Caroline kept guessing, okay, so is there going to be a 300 kick here? And then it finally happens, right? Like late in the second movie. But like, it's just like so much like this is Zack Snyder doing Zack Snyderisms, right? That,
Yeah, I think that actually really destroys the most of my like it's sort of the, you know, auteurness of it brings it down. It's sort of like, you know what it actually reminds me of is the prequels in a weird way. Um in the sense of like this is a person unrestrained. He kind of got a blank check from Netflix. He got to make his own story with his own characters. He got a story credit, right? You know, he shot it the way he wanted. Netflix famously doesn't give very many notes, right? Like they're probably the most filmmaker driven sort of like studio for projects like this, right? Where they give no notes, right? Like that's how they do. I mean, I don't know, maybe they do now. This was like 10 years ago they didn't give notes,
yeah.
but maybe they do now. But and I feel like this is the sort of stuff that maybe, you know, sort of the constraints placed on this guy by a studio were part of the things that made the magic that I sort of like connected to and fell in love with. Not that I didn't, you know, not that I don't love this movie because I do like this movie obviously, but like I said, I didn't fall in love with it in the way that I have with previous movies. Even, you know, like, yeah, I don't know. It has so much to do with the ecosystem, I guess, is like part of it, right? Because Star Wars sucks right now. Outside of Andor, which I watched like 2 years ago, right? I just haven't thought about Star Wars in a long time, and this like sort of scratched that Star Wars itch, right? But I'm also getting that Star Wars itch scratched by Dune. So it's just like, there's a lot. I feel like we could, you know, I don't know, we could go
Yeah,
into
no,
talking about, I
it's
guess.
interesting because I've been watching the Clone Wars, um, which has its own problems. It's not it suffers from being a kid show, I think. But
Yeah, it was on Cartoon Network, right? So, you know.
yeah, I think weird because I think most of the fan base are like people who watched it as kids that just want to like see the end of it or whatever. Um, uh, but yeah, I don't know. But this movie, like these movies, I don't know if I could say that like I'd. You know what? Maybe I'd say. You know how we talk about like fan of the genre ratings for
Of course.
games. I think
Yeah.
I could give that a recommendation on that, on that basis, right? fan of the genre. Maybe if he makes another 4 of them, there'll be something worth like I would be interested in checking out the director's cuts of these just to see if they could like, because like I said, the bones are super interesting. There is a lot of cool stuff implicated, but there's just some like
I really do have to say I love the world building. I love the world building so much in a Gonzo way. It reminds me of quite a lot of Aquaman in this one. There's so much to like the lore that I think is really complex, but like in a new and interesting way that doesn't feel rote, which is actually pretty rare, I guess, for movies like these, right? Which is funny because it is a Star Wars ripoff, right?
no, and like I said, like the aesthetic is very 40K, right? Like I think they call like the thing that maintains the robots like the Mechanicus Imperium or whatever. They call it the Imperium,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's like very like you're very close to 40K on that end too, right? In terms of just
But
like,
just like the synthesis of all of it, I don't know. It just like works on a level that I didn't expect. I expected to kind of like hate the lore of this world or whatever. And to be fair, I think actually after the first one I did, or the first one I didn't care. I just thought it was kind of nothing. The second one is the one that makes it so interesting, right? Because you kind of get into the I don't know, like I mean, there's some stuff, right? Like the aesthetics. I love the aesthetic that it is, this that we're using the Soviet Union, right, instead of Nazi Germany, right? God, I love that we're using, commissars and the like. That stuff works like gangbusters, just as like a freshness thing, which is also a sort of a 40K thing. But like it's all the stuff in the second movie around like the princess and the lore, and she tells her backstory, and I was just like, oh, this is like there's like cool shit in here, I guess.
so what so I'm gonna lay a pitch on you because I was thinking about this. I was thinking about this like it should have been like a prestige series earlier, but I think it finally crystallizes what this should have been, which is it should have been the Canterbury Tales, right? Like each episode is an hour about each of the characters' backstories, and then the final one can be the big fight. Something like because like I would have loved to have seen a little bit more about each of the characters besides like the 10 minutes about we get of each in the second movie, or maybe we just move it into the first movie, right? Because like that's like it feels like. So let's put a spoiler warning up here. Spoilers for Rebel Moon parts 1 and 2. Just because I think I need to go into some of the details here. I think do we think this is a spoilable movie? Like, do you think getting spoiled on it makes it a huge difference?
I'm not worried about spoil. It's Seven Samurai. Most of what's going to happen just by understanding the kind of like genre conventions, right? Really, the only question is who's gonna die, who's gonna live, right? Towards the end of the movie, right? And maybe that's the only thing that's like spoilable. I don't know. It's just so straightforward. It's like you can't spoil Aquaman either, right? Like because you just understand from the get-go who the bad guys are. These are simple, straightforward stories. They are not. There's not too much in the plot twists. I guess the first movie has that sort of plot twist, which, to be fair, I genuinely did not see coming. But we'll talk about that, I guess.
Yeah. So what was I gonna say? So the thing that felt very unearned to me, which is I think after the twist that you're talking about, and also a thing that we'll get to that, is that like the death of Blood Axe of the as I called them in our chat, is like the male Senua's sacrifice twin, like didn't feel earned, right? Like it felt like this is supposed to be this big epic moment, but we've known him for like 5 minutes. It felt like,
yeah, yep.
And also, I think this is a larger criticism. There is a lot of slow-mo in these movies, some of which seems excessive. Actually, I was going to make this joke earlier when I'm talking about cutting time. I was like, well, you could just speed up the slow-mo sections and be like 30% shorter. But like some of the action doesn't look right, even if maybe it's more realistic. Like the way that the things coming to my mind here is, so Blood Axe runs up like a crane arm and does a big leaping stab. But as he's running up the crane arm, like that first like thing, it just like looks like he's like walking kind of. It like just doesn't look like he's running particularly fast. Similarly, there's a lot of fights where like people just kind of like look like they just kind of like half thwack somebody with a gun and it just like knocks them out forever, which doesn't feel right. And I think like the action just doesn't seem shot correctly. Maybe is the right way to do it. Do you have better language for this? Do you pick up what I'm putting
There's
down?
some action that I like for instance, so the kind of centerpiece for the action that I really loved is in the very beginning. You know, Cora shows up in that barn, rescues the girl from the soldiers. This is like Zack Snyder at his best. Super clear geography. You have a number of different assailants all attacking from different angles, and the camera is moving such that you simultaneously get brought into sort of the energy of the moment while also not losing, you know, track of the action that's playing out before your eyes, right? You know, on one end you might say somebody like Michael Bay is an action director who is too frantic for his own good, and you can't track the bad guy. You can't actually track the action that's being kind of like played out. And maybe on the opposite end, you could maybe go with like Steven Spielberg. Maybe is a good example of this. Just somebody who is too sort of slow and plotting to create energy in an action sequence, right? Which is why Steven Spielberg action sequences are more about tension than about energy, right? Actually, you know, Tarantino might be a better example of this, by the way. I don't know, something like that.
No, no,
right?
I definitely feel it because something I want to point to is that like another example of I don't know if he quite counts as director, but Jackie Chan's action scenes are good at like showing you the hits and the impact of individual hits, and that is a thing in particular that I thought that these movies were lacking. That like
And this is something that Zack Snyder is amazing at in under other circumstances, right? For instance, when I talk about why I like Man of Steel as an action movie, it is because of the impact filmmaking, and it's this very specific thing that he does, which is about the camera follows the momentum, right? So, for instance, when Superman is flying into so in a Marvel movie, this is what happens. You watch the camera follows the character coming into the scene, and then they hit all of the people away, but the camera is rooted on the character, right? It's just tracking the person, right? If you see the Joss Whedon Avengers movies, those are both rife with this kind of filmmaking, right? What Zack Snyder does is when Superman flies into a group of enemies and he punches a guy, right? When he punches Zod, the camera follows Zod's punch. So what happens is the camera is tracking the momentum of the hit, and that's what creates this feeling of like, oh my god, power, right? And this is also something I think Jackie Chan does, right? Where he's following it's not, you know, we're not dealing with super strength, we're not dealing with like whatever, right? But all of his I don't know, his camera follows the power in the
yeah
punch. It doesn't follow the actor who is doing the punch, right?
yeah the specific
And
thing.
that's something that is a problem sort of in this movie, I
Yeah,
think for reasons that are like honestly pretty stupid and mundane, which is that there's a lot of gunshots, and gunshots typically don't have a lot of momentum associated with them. And
not
like
only it's a lot of laser gunshots that don't have a
mhm,
lot of physical impact, right? Like there are times when they have the shots have impact and it kind of works, but I see what you're saying. Like that, just to
yeah.
go back to Jackie, and also a lot of the swords are like cutty swords, which don't impact the slice, right? Like just to go back to the Jackie Chan thing just for a second. I think I'm cribbing this from every
Every frame of
frame of
painting.
painting is it's like when they do cuts, it like shows the same moment from before and after the cut for like half a second, and so you feel the momentum there. But yeah, I also think, and I think it's even more mundane bullshit than it's guns. I think that part of it's that it's CG, and that
Mhm.
I just don't like. John Wick is very good at doing realistic feeling gunplay. Um, this like again, maybe it's just the amount of slow mo, but it just feels like nobody hits anything with gunshots, right? Uh, this is also like gonna. I think it fits here. A very weirdly specific complaint that I was or criticism that I was like mulling over in my mind is the guns feel weird, and I think it's because like in Star Wars, all of the guns are based on real world guns with like doodads tacked on. They feel a bit more grounded. These all feel like video game guns, or like I kept thinking of was what was that MMO set in space that everybody loved but shut down?
Eve, Elite Dangerous.
No, it was like
Star Citizen. These are all.
It's not a spacecraft MMO. It's like on a planet. Hold on. Let me see if I can figure this out.
Everybody loved and it shut down.
It's got player housing as a big feature.
Oh, WildStar.
WildStar, thank you. That is exactly what I'm thinking of, right? Maybe everybody loved it was a little bit much, but the weapons felt like WildStar weapons, right? Like that kind of cartoony thing, but it was on real people, which is obviously not quite correct there. But yeah.
That's interesting. I think I probably agree with you. Yeah, I think Zack Snyder is just probably bad at like gunshots, right? And good at like melee stuff, right? Like when like all of the iconic action sequences are like hand-to-hand fistfights or like spear and shield in 300. You know what I mean? That kind of stuff. And when at the very tail end of the movie, it becomes a lightsaber duel, I also quite like that action scene. So it's in a way, I thought it was sort of like bookended with two action sequences that I liked quite a lot, and then a number of them that I thought were more or less uninteresting. With little, I don't know, some of them like are neat. Like for instance, there's the guy who uses the axes, the Native American abs guy. I like him, and I like basically everything that includes him. Which is maybe that's melee weapons, right? He's like whipping axes around, but he's also kind of paired with that general. I kind of like their vibe. I don't know. There's like more stuff. Yeah.
Prince Tarek is that character's name. Which
from
was
from Neo Noir Griffin Planet. Like what a
No, it was funny because like my girlfriend and I both picked up on him being like basically supposed to be like vaguely Native American, and then like after he tells his backstory, I'm like, wait, he's just kind of cosplaying being a Native American. He was like an aristocrat, right? And like Neo London, right? Like, which is like, it was a cool backstory. It just like felt like a weird direction for his character.
It's the concept shit that I love. That backstory, I was just like, I need 2 movies set on this fucking planet. You're telling me that there's 1920s gangsters who fly around on fucking griffins in space? Like, come on, like. Anyway, maybe it would. So you mentioned the stuff about the plot twists in the first movie, right? In the first movie, I actually, to be fair, I sort of loved this. I think I'm on team. This is great.
This is the double cross, right?
Yeah, Charlie Hunnam plays essentially Han Solo, but imagine if Han Solo sells out Luke Skywalker to the Empire at the end of the first movie.
Yeah, it's
I was just like, there's a lot of little stuff that actually bugged me in like a dumb way, right? There's quite a lot in this movie in terms of just plot mechanics that I think are, we would maybe call them George Lucas script notes plot mechanics, right? So famously in the script for Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, George Lucas would write things like they fight, right? Instead of actually describing what the fight itself looks like, only to figure that stuff out kind of like later. This is like they escape, and the mechanics of them escaping from this double cross are so stupid that I was just like, oh my god, please think about your movie better, right?
This was the thing that bothered me the most, right? Because so just for people who didn't watch and decided to watch past the spoiler, our Han Solo character, I guess he's more like what is Benicio del Toro in
his name is Kai, right? Is his name?
Oh, in this character, something like that. Who cares? He's dead. He's like, we need to do a drop off. I'm like, oh, and that's when I was like, this is gonna be a double cross, isn't it? But like, why would? And to be fair to it, I was like, why did he gather all these people? He's like, they're all worth a bounty. Okay, he explains that, right? The thing that happens is that he says, I have a job for you to Gunnar, who is like, a farmer, and so not a wanted person, and he has him do like the knockout thing to Altheus, but like he doesn't, and he unlocks her, right? And it's like as it was happening, I'm like, wait, is this like a triple cross, right? Is like this actually like a plan? Did they set this up? No, it just did something that is completely unexplainable in the logic of the movie, which is like have Gunnar do the thing that he should have just done himself.
Yeah, like I would maybe call it the Watsonian. You know, there's the Doyle's.
Doyleist
There's
versus
kind of like
Watsonian.
a
Yeah.
Doyleist versus Watsonian. Yeah, Watsonian is in universe. Doyleist is sort
Yeah.
of out of universe. The Watsonius thing is it's pride, it's hubris, right? Oh, the bad guys are convinced they're gonna win, so he gives a gun to her boyfriend essentially, so that her boyfriend is the one that shoots him because he's just like that much of a dick or whatever, right? But like, it's just contrived. It's like the definition of contrived,
But
right?
see,
The moment.
I was gonna say that would have worked if it was Noble, right?
Yeah.
If like Noble is enough of an arrogant jackass to be like, and now I'm gonna make your stupid boyfriend shoot you in the back of your neck just to show you how much power I have and how much you don't. But it's not him. It's the scumbag, the bounty hunter.
Yeah, yeah, and I think so. I want to defend the plot twist itself because I think it's good. Like I said, I was actually I honestly, it was so kind of by the numbers up to that point that it didn't even cross my mind that we were walking into, and especially the moment of the reminder, right? So in like planting and payoff, this like screenwriting 101, you explain a thing, right? You remind the audience of the thing and then you pay off the thing, right? So they plant the bounties way in the beginning when they essentially recruit Kai, right? The reminder of, oh, there's bounties on everybody's heads, right? Is in this dialogue scene where he is pledging his allegiance to the cause, where he's like, you know what? You've turned me into a true believer. There's bounty on all your guys' heads, and if I was a different man, I would turn you in. But I want to do it right after we do this job. I'm whole heart, and I was like, oh my god, this is so cute. What a fucking moment. Nope, it was a lie. He was just and I was so bamboozled by it because I just expected the movie to be worse than it was better, and I also just appreciate that like for I guess I want to say that I think Han Solo created this archetype, right? Scoundrel with a heart of gold archetype, right? And it's become a little bit rote. So it's wild to me that I'm saying this, but the scoundrel who's actually just a scoundrel feels like novel in a way, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, this isn't, he's not going to save them in the end. He's just a dickhead, right? Like he is just a jackass. And as much as I loved Charlie Hunnam's character and I wish he would have stuck around, and I probably would say that he deserved to stick around just as kind of a piece of character contrast maybe. And we can talk about that a little bit later. All of this stuff worked, like all of that stuff like worked well on a macro level. It's just like the actual implementation of it and kind of the whole fight scene that comes out. There's some good stuff in there a little bit. I quite like her and Noble getting this opportunity to sort of 1v1 and she wins, but he comes back is like, that's neat. I was kind of on board with all of this. This is definitely a movie that doesn't feel like it was two movies chopped in half, even though it quite literally was, right? Because of the nature of some of this stuff, right? The climax felt properly climactic, right? But yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand. Like, I think I will agree with you that like the scoundrel being a scoundrel, like even as it was happening, we were like, oh, he is going to realize he made a mistake, and he's the one that frees them or whatever. Like, Noble's going to screw him out of the payment. No, that doesn't happen. So that's fine. The thing I will say about the fight scene that I didn't like is the entire time we were both screaming at the screen, "Kick him off the platform! Kick him off the platform!" And like it contrives to not have him go off the platform for like a 5-minute fight, right? For like no good reason. Also, immediately I knew he wasn't, or I suspected he wasn't going to die, right? Just because like, unless, and I was afraid at the end of the second movie they were going to do it again, and then she cuts his head off. I was like, okay, good. No coming back from that one. But that's all. That's all fine. Like I said, I think I like the second one a lot more, even though there's still like, it feels like there's like not a lot of like some of the stuff, some of the implied world building just isn't built out enough, right, to make a lot of sense to me. Like the nature of magic, which is like there's like the princess and like maybe the armbands for Nemesis. Um, I actually, as Gunnar was dying, I thought that like the princess was gonna show up, or like, turns out Althea's had the power of the princess in her all along and like keep him from dying, but that didn't happen. Um, but like, and then like the one that really stuck in my car was the Anthony Hopkins robot, which just kind of like felt like needed like a touch more explanation to feel warranted in a way, right? Like it feels like it's supposed to be this big moment when he comes crashing down. It feels like you just like barely got a taste of him. And in some ways, his reentrance felt a little unearned. But how do you feel
Wait,
about
I'm
all
sorry. The robot?
that? Yeah,
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, I love the robot. I love everything about Anthony Hopkins' robot.
no,
This is like
I think the
perfect
actual
use of
design is great, right?
yeah, like the design. I love the stuff with the thing. I love that in the first movie, like they're all shitting on the like this is part of the world building stuff that I was I was like deeply, deeply into, right? Um, but then he shows up at the end and he like beats the shit out of that tank. Is what you're talking about? That was unearned.
Yeah, he just kind of like
Interesting.
shows up. Also, every time Titus was on screen and a character, he had like when the robot shows up, I was like, this is when Titus can say who, because it's the same actor that plays the Chaser in Guardians of the Galaxy. But just like it felt like he wanted to be a bigger part of the movie. He just kind of was like there and like I don't know. I find this happening a lot in movies, and maybe it's just my senses being off because we've got so much good television, right? Where like things have time to breathe a little bit more, and movies just don't have that luxury to be within a reasonable time frame. So I'm willing to be swayed on that one. It just feels like he showed up for like 15 seconds in the first movie, and then like another 30 seconds before he shows up on the battlefield and like kicks the shit out of a tank, which didn't.
I don't really know how I feel about it. I think I'm ultimately pro. I think I'm ultimately pro the robot. I like Titus. I like I guess I kind of like everybody. I don't know. The thing that is maybe just like the action had gone on for so long that there wasn't like a breather in a way. Something that I watched recently, which I'll talk about in the back half. I watched Furiosa, the new Mad Max movie. There are some action sequences in that movie that are quite long, maybe like 20 or 30 minutes long, like really just end to end to end fighting, right? But because the movie takes its time in other ways and is quiet and kind of reserved in other ways, it does a good job of building those action sequences to kind of this like nonstop ride. I kind of felt like in the second half of Rebel Moon, I got a little sort of just like winded by like the fighting, right? Um Even if all of that stuff I thought was quite good in terms of playing out the battle from, it's like, for instance, if I'm making a war movie about a battle, fighting a battle, this is a pretty good blueprint of that, right? It There's great geography, you have a deep understanding of kind of the stuff that's going on, and when it cuts between different sort of like fronts of the fighting, I understand and I can track what's going on. There's kind of like twists and reversals, right, where they kill a bunch of guys and that feels good, but oh no, there's more. There's a bunch of guys that flood the, like that get in the tunnel, right? But then they all get blown up by the firebomb kind of thing. Like all that stuff just like generally kind of like worked for me. I thought the movie really took off once Cora and Gunnar went up into the ship. That whole sequence And basically everything in there I thought was really, really great. And just like the perfect kind of capstone. But part of it came from the tension and like that's like the relief, right? You know, there's this moment where you see her, they're setting up to do this thing, and you know, it's a moment of tension. Can she get in? Can she get past this? Whatever. Like, is her stuff good enough? Right. That moment of slowdown I think is what sort of mattered, and in the middle section there just like wasn't a lot of slowdown. So I don't know, I'm probably on team like the robot was cool and stuff like that.
No,
Just all of the action in the middle of this second movie, kind of, I would say in the back half of the second act of the movie, right, is when it just got like too much in a row.
yeah. So I will say that I thought the robot was cool. Just that, like I said, I thought it was not entirely earned. Although, like it going on for forever, the action going on forever, I think it's just like a pull straight from Seven Samurai, right? Like I feel like the third hour of that movie is just the fight. Um,
Yeah, but like there's moments of the fight where things chill out,
that's
even
fair.
for, you know, like a little bit, and that's the real thing that I think I was kind of like looking for, right? Um, there's obviously like a lot of deaths too. This is also part of the movie is killing people left and right, which I also just love that. I actually quite like that Blood Axe dies, not because it was a good death, because I probably agree in like a staging concern, but just like Kai dies, Blood Axe dies, you know, it's just like they're just losing people fucking all over the place, right? And so it's not actually Blood Axe who joins the Seven Samurai, but it's his, you know, his
His
lieutenant,
Lieutenant
right?
Milius, yeah,
Yeah. Um, who I don't even know if like, are there seven of them?
six.
It's Gunner.
They say it explicitly in the movies, like how like when they get back, they say how many, six plus Alpheus and Gunnar. Um,
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I quite like Gunnar also, is the other thing. Is I think Gunnar and Korra had chemistry, which is wild to say, but actually maybe not that wild to say, because I also, you know, I think maybe Zack Snyder is actually pretty good at romance sometimes, because like I think Leonidas and his wife in 300 have chemistry. There's chemistry in 300, or I'm sorry, not 300, in um uh Man of Steel or whatever.
mm.
I don't know. Well, who knows? There's just like a lot of like little stuff that goes well. But yeah, the whole sequence of going up into the ship or whatever. Did you care about the scale of things at all? This is something that I saw people complaining about. That I don't. Well, maybe I won't poison the well. What did?
What do you mean by the scale of things?
The complaint is this is ridiculous. There's a giant star cruiser of 40,000 people, and they care about they care about
Oh,
the
the
grain
grain
from
from
one
one farm.
village. The grain from one village is going to take care of 40,000 like stormtroopers or whatever. Like, do you care about that stuff at all?
So honestly, if they just cut the lot, like I had thought what was going to happen is like Titus thinks they need the grain, which maybe speaks poorly of his strategic stuff. But like he thinks they want the grain, but what they actually want is what's her name again? Cora's like actual name. They actually want the Scar Giver, right? And
Sure.
so
Yeah.
like he is wrong, but like there's still a reason why they won't bomb them, right? And that like which is actually how it plays out, right? Like as soon as they have this,
Yeah.
like we don't need to care about the grain anymore. But they could have, I think they could have just said, you know, like Noble could have just like hit him in the back of the head and be like, we never cared about the fucking grain. We just cared about getting, you know, what's your nuts, right? Um, uh, and I think I thought that was a misstep. I don't like. I think there are reasons why they could not care about the grain, or reasons why they could have acted like they did without having to care about the grain. And I thought, and so like that kind of just like resolved this in my mind. Something that this is kind of related that bothered me as a scale thing is that the King's Gaze, right? Like all of the ships are like basically the same shape, but at different sizes. So like when they blow up the one at the end of the first movie, we were like, is that the King's Gaze? It's a lot smaller than I thought. And then they zoom out and it's like there, right? But it's like not clearly communicated, at least to my lights, what ship, like, you know, like is the ship breaking through the clouds the King's Gaze, or is it like, you know, like a landing ship or whatever?
Yeah, this is something I definitely would say that Star Wars does well. Just like I don't know why the Star Destroyer is such an iconic vehicle, right? And I never confused a Star Destroyer for like whatever you would call those, like those transports that have the they like they
Yeah, the
fold
three
up,
wing, the
but
tri wing.
yeah,
Yeah,
whatever those transports are. Like I never confused one for the other, right? Because the designs of these things are so good, and the designs of these things are so good, even like onto before and after the prequels and original like trilogy, right? Like you see how the Republic Star Cruisers become Star Destroyers, right? It is a modified version of the exact same design. You see how the X-wing comes out of the whatever the other sort of like stuff is, right? I got basically zero of that from Rebel Moon. They had pretty shit sort of I don't know, I don't even know what you would call this, maybe set design, maybe.
yeah,
But outside of just the fact that like this stuff is like big spaceship in space and they're doing spaceship kind of like stuff. I don't really know. Part of it is that like it's all like I guess I kind of like the tank, but it's all just like bulky and blobby in a way that is just not super
yeah. No, I, I,
engaging.
I think they were cool designs. I just don't think they were different enough, right?
Mm,
Like if the dreadnought or whatever they're, like the battleship that like flies down, if that was like a different looking ship than the King's Gaze, like a very distinct looking from, then I think it would work. Um, but it felt like one was just a scaled down version of the other.
yeah.
Um,
This is I think I probably would make the claim if they just put this in the Star Wars universe, it would be a better movie. Just
yeah,
because Star Wars iconography would make a lot of this stuff work, right?
I like at the end of this movie, I was thinking this would be a cool story, like what sets off like the rebellion in between episodes 3 and 4, right? Like,
Yeah.
uh, like,
Yeah, like for instance, if it's instead of that tank, if it's an AT-AT, that would be awesome, right?
yeah,
That moment would play so much differently because of all of the stuff. If it was a Star Destroyer, honestly, if it was a fucking Star Destroyer, right? Like that would make a huge difference, right?
yeah, or
Um,
for make it like a half step between like the 6-legged tank walker from the prequels and the AT-AT, right? Like uh
yeah.
something like that. But you're absolutely correct.
It reminds me, honestly, man, it's funny to say this. Star Wars is in such a bad spot. It reminds me of Rogue One, right? Like Rogue One had these moments where the Hammerhead, right? You remember there's like that one Rebel fleet ship, that crazy Hammerhead that smashes one Star Destroyer into another Star Destroyer or whatever. It's like that stuff, like that. You like just that stuff would have made this movie so much better, in my opinion. Even if Nemesis was using lightsabers instead of using kind of her, like I liked the swords, and I actually quite liked the effect of the swords. But like, man, that would have been awesome if they were fucking lightsabers. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I found myself going, it's different than Star Wars because the good ones are blue, or the good ones are red and the bad ones are blue, instead of the good ones
Mhm.
being blue and the bad one being red, right? Like,
Well, the thing I like about Nemesis is that like she, if we were to transpose this into Star Wars, she wouldn't be a Jedi, right? Like she's
yeah,
just like a fucking like random like nobody or whatever. And like I said, I wish Kai stuck around. I had a problem with the ensemble, which was the ensemble towards the end lost maybe I would call it like
Edge.
heart is actually sort of what I was thinking. Like jovial, like somebody who's snappy. I've complained about this in let me explain this in WoW terms. I've complained about this in WoW terms before. I dislike how the current version of WoW faction leaders work because they all have pretty similar personalities, right? Generally speaking, all of the faction leaders in WoW at the moment are pretty noble, bright, good guys who try and do the right thing, right? Thrall and Blaine Bloodhoof and Lortham Artheron. There's maybe some differences on the margins, and I could point to that, and we could talk about it or whatever, right? But like when I'm designing an ensemble, right, and when I'm designing an ensemble cast, I want there to be contrast and friction, and this is what I like about a character like Sylvanas being part of, right, like the Horde leadership. She brings a totally different energy and vibe. She's catty and mean in a way, right? And I felt like the thing that Rebel Moon was sort of missing in its like core ensemble was Kikucho from Seven Samurai, right? Kikisho is bumbling and he's funny and he's the comic relief, but he's also really like the heart of of like the team or whatever. Um I just kind of felt that like that was missing. That was the thing that was missing. And Kai weirdly was that in the original grouping of the characters because he is funny and he's upbeat and he was getting laugh lines, like stuff like that. And so this is kind of what I had sort of like
Yeah,
latched onto, but yeah.
I would agree with you. Part of the problem too is that like Titus was kind of that for a bit, but then like he like sobers up and gets real serious, right?
Yeah.
Um, and they try and do a couple things with the characters, but they're all too, like you said, they're too noble. They're too noble for it to like really work. Because you could have done it with like Milius or Blood Axe, right? Like have them be like a little bit like more of a rough edge, right? Like like a biker gang more than like a
You know what? Honestly, it's really like I'm describing like a Jack Sparrow kind of thing. Titus was close to
oh
this.
yeah.
Titus could have been this, but you're right. He sort of sobered up and got serious. But there's a version of Titus that's kind of like the drunken master in a
Or like
way.
Yoda, right? Like Yoda before he
Yeah.
before he makes his turn, right? Where he's like, right?
And it's like
Or Uncle
kooky
Iroh, I
and
guess, like ish, right?
yeah.
Like,
Oh, that would actually, yes, that would also be a very good example of sort of the archetype. I guess I'm sort of
you
describing.
know, there's maybe like Deadpool and Cable, right? Like DC, it's like
Yeah,
Plastic Man.
because there's a lot of stuff that I like in terms of it being clever, right? So the smoke grenade, all of this stuff about going up to the ship, I'm like, oh, this is good shit, right? Like
Yeah.
this is what I like about something like Fury Road is actually a good example of this, right? Where you can see like characters are not explaining their plans to the camera. They're just they're trusting the audience to have good intuition on what I'm sort of doing. Better Call Saul is all about this, right? Where it's just like you're watching a character do a thing and you're like, "What? What are they doing? What's the plan here?" Right? But then a thing happens and you're like, "Oh, I think they're doing this." And it turns out they are doing that thing. And you get this kind of like, I don't know. It's just it's clever and it's tense and it's interesting. All that stuff works like kind of like great. But I feel like if you had a character who's really describing that sort of like think outside the box, lateral thinking, right? It would have gone I'm surprised you didn't hate this more, to be honest with you.
Um,
Um
like I said, the second one was better. I
yeah.
hated the first one quite a bit.
Okay, that's
Like
fine.
a lot of these things you're talking, it's like it felt like they did a lot of telling and not showing. Like
Mhm.
a lot of unnecessary slowdown in the early part of the film.
It has garbage pacing too. Is the other
Yeah,
thing that was really bothering me about the first one. It's the same problem Batman for Superman had. No, it had arthritis, narrative arthritis. They just cut, and you were just like in a completely different place doing a completely different thing. And I was just like, what the fuck? How do we fucking get here? Right? It's only towards the end of it, where they actually have this kind of like thing of like, okay, we're gonna go do this drop off and whatever. It's like, okay, this like sets us up for kind of like a plot thread, right? But basically the whole middle of that movie is them just cutting to places, right, and doing things based on these throwaway lines, and I felt like I was being whipped around in a centrifuge kind of.
yeah, and like I don't know, there was like some here. Let me go back to the notes that I sent you. The one that's popping out in my head is that they aimed the redneck Hickman, and I was like, really? You're gonna do like I know that's like a very small thing, but it's kind of like the first thing I think I sent you was like all throughout both these movies the I forget, I think it's from Garth Marenghi's Dark Place. It's just I know writers use subtext and they're all cowards. It's just like all throughout this movie, right? Like it's
True. Yeah, real.
it's like the senator decided that the emperor was bad, and so it'll be like the Ides of March, and they literally just do the Ides of March, right? That's not even like it's literally just the scene, just the Ides of March. What else? Yeah. And there was a lot of stuff that was kind of like I thought was like silly. Maybe is the wrong way to put it, but like if I said to like pick the most obvious choice, it would be that, right? Like there's like not a lot of like they look like some combination of like like you said, Soviet or fascist kind of like dress up, right? Like, like
Yep.
I think they look like M. Bison, who's also like an XP of that. Um, uh, there was just like a lot of like little dumb stuff that got under my skin quite a bit, but I was willing, like, basically as we started watching it, it was dumb, and Caroline, I will not make you watch. Caroline's my girlfriend. I will not make you watch the second one with me if you don't want to. It's fine, right? And then after we were done, she's like, "This is dumb, but I want to see how it ends." So, and like that,
that's probably better than I would have expected, to be honest.
no, but like that's basically how I like. It's like there are interesting bones, and it kept my attention, and it's something original. So I was willing to give it the chance, and it wasn't great, but it was, I don't know, it was better than watching, I don't know, like Caroline had me watch.
You know what's better than? Like all of the recent Marvel movies.
Yeah, no, you know what? Absolutely.
Probably like this. Better than like, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know, like all of the recent ones. It feels like it's just, yeah, yep.
No, I would say like maybe Guardians 3. It's worse than, but that's like.
Oh, that's true. It would be worse than Guardians 3. I forgot about Guardians 3.
Yeah, it's like.
But just like the Eternals, the Marvels, whatever.
Madam Web.
Like, yeah, even stuff that I theoretically liked, like Shang-Chi or Black Panther 2, I definitely liked this better than those two movies. Just because these are so forgettable, right? This, I don't know. We've talked about Quantumania, woof, right? Like,
Yeah. They're just like, is this Across the Spider-Verse count as a Spider-Man movie?
I did like Across the Spider-Verse quite a lot, so it's better. Across the Spider-Verse is better.
Yeah, but
and what's funny, actually, probably some of the recent. I obviously loved Aquaman 2 so much. That's probably better. The Flash I thought was better.
I don't think it was. I think this is. I would rather watch this than the Flash again.
Okay, interesting. That's that. Listen, that's fair enough. I get that. I don't know. Yeah.
No, this is better than. Let me go to the official ones. There's the Marvels, better than the Marvels, worse than Guardians, better than Ant-Man and the Wasp, better than Wakanda Forever, better than Love and Thunder, better than Multiverse of Madness.
Christ.
Better
than, my God.
Better than the Eternal. Jesus, the Eternals. Holy fuck, that was a movie that happened.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
But will it be better than Deadpool and Wolverine? Which is,
I guess that's the question. I saw the Deadpool and Wolverine trailer or whatever. I'm interested to sort of see.
We need to watch Loki.
What? I'm sorry.
We need to watch Loki because apparently Loki sets up.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. I will. I've been. Yeah. Okay. I've been dragging ass on that one for quite a while.
Yeah. No worries. I've been dragging ass on a lot of series that I should watch. I finally got I've been trying to watch Sopranos for like 8 years, and I finally am like halfway through the second season. So
Good. Yeah. Listen, we're finally getting there. Anyway, so is it?
Do we have anything else we want to talk about with these movies? Like, what did you think of the CG, like the graphics in general?
I generally thought it was bad. This is sort of why I like the first fight scene so much, because there's so little of it, right? Like it was just mostly, stunt actors, right? Like they had stunt actors in a real set, and it looked great. I am honestly, unironically, becoming one of these like CG hater people, and I sort of hate it because I've railed against these people for a long time, but I don't know what happened. It feels like in the last 10 years, CG has gone downhill by like huge leaps and bounds, right? Like it's wild to me that the CG in Quantumania looks worse than the CG in the original Ant-Man, and they're 10 years apart, right? Not even 7 years apart, right? And I just feel like this is the same thing. Like I don't even know what it is. Is it VFX studios are charging more now than they used to? Maybe it has to do with kind of like budgets. Like I could maybe talk about some of this stuff. Like I could expect if it was like some of that kind of like thing or whatever. But I don't know. Like It's just wild.
I
Especially because again, like the point of comparison is fucking Dune, and Dune has such good CG, right? Because so much of it is very like I don't know, practical and these like lived in sort of like spaces and sets and all of this stuff.
I suspect that it's a combination of two things. One, I do think cost is a thing. I think they're asking for more, and you know, famously, these VFX studios will like win awards and then shut down because they can't stay open and like work their animators to the bone. Um, but I think another part of it, I think the bigger one, if I had to guess, is something like using CG in places where they don't have to, and that causing problems, right? Like, when CG was harder to do, like computationally, you relied on practical as much as you could, and you filled in the gaps with CG for like the things that didn't make sense. Now it feels like, you avoid doing practical for as long as you can, right?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, I watched Furiosa this weekend, and man, the action in there is so good, and it's because so much of it is fucking real, you know? Um, I'm not gonna shut up about this fucking movie. I guess maybe we should do an episode on Fury. Do you want to watch Furiosa?
Yeah, I need to. I was thinking about watching it next week. And I need to.
It bombed at the
Really?
box office this weekend, which I'm so fucking depressed about. Like,
it's the only movie I've seen advertised, hard, right? Like they're pushing it hard.
Yeah.
This is not a big thing for Rebel Moon, but something that my girlfriend is a little bit more into the celebrity stuff. She's like, the actor that plays Belisarius is 37. The actor that plays Korra is 42, and she's supposed to be his daughter.
That's wild, actually. I didn't know that she was so young. I quite love the casting. This is one of the things that I probably would say Zack Snyder is the best at, right? If I were writing a book of film history and I was like, I got to write a chapter on Zack Snyder and why he was like a thing, I think a lot of it is casting. He has discovered like legit movie stars, right? Michael Fassbender, Oscar Isaac, right? Just like pulled people out of this kind of obscurity, right? And I think because so much of his brand is tied up in his movies, he kind of gets away with not having like super huge stars. There just aren't like there's no Chris Pratt for this movie, right? Sophia Boutella, who I love and I think she's good in this part, right? She's not a movie star, right?
Yeah,
None of these people are movies.
She's the knife foot person from Kingsman.
Yeah, that was her breakout role. That was like the thing that like put her on the map or whatever. But like the guy who played Gunner, he's a nobody. What the fuck has he been in, right? Maybe the guy who played Noble, he's been in a bunch of stuff. He started in Game of Thrones, right? And kind of came over.
It felt like they like gave him extra cheekbones, like just like perfectly molded to be like the like asshole commissar, right? Like perfect casting there.
Yeah, it's wild to me how much this guy gets away, and his movies are so much better in my opinion for it, right? Like the fact that these are kind of these nobodies, just makes it tick in a way that other movies don't, right? When you kind of get that Ocean's 11 experience, and like not to shit on Ocean, I love Ocean's 11 obviously, but like part of the draw for Ocean's 11 is that you are watching a huge group of super well-known, super recognizable actors, right? George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, these are like the most recognizable actors in the fucking world, right? And it's a testament to Steven Soderbergh is a great director that I could like lose myself in that or whatever, right? But like Zack Snyder's not as good a director as Steven Soderbergh, but he can get these actors to kind of lose themselves in these parts. And I just you know what, I fucking love that for him. This guy is wildly good at casting, especially casting like outside of the what's the name of the Blood Axe? Not Blood Axe, that's Ray Fisher, right? Who's Cyborg, right? But the lieutenant after the fact. Do you know what I'm talking about? Is that yeah. Like what a oh my god.
E. Duffy?
I actually didn't even know that they were non-binary. It's just like what a great look from a character to just immediately and you just get it. You're like, oh, I understand who this person is just because of such a well casted. I don't know, just because of like such a well casted part. So yeah.
Yeah. No.
I wonder if Milius is named for John Milius. You know who John Milius is?
No. I just assumed it was
It's
vaguely, Roman sounding thing, which is a thing that seems to be in this movie a lot.
John Milius is he's the guy who did Red Dawn. And he is, I think, the screenwriter for Apocalypse Now. He's famous because he's part of that new school. Like, there's all these directors who all came up and they were all friends. So Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Francis Ford Coppola, like these guys, like they were all friends with each other, like when they were, like when they were coming up and doing stuff, kind of thing, right? John Milius was part of that friend group, but he was like the conservative. He's like a gun-loving, like hard right, guy or whatever, which is why he obviously like made like fucking Red Dawn and shit. But it's funny when you have James Cameron, when you have George Lucas. Like George Lucas is like an incredibly left-wing guy when it comes to sort of like if you let him give a reading of his, right, he will tell you that the empire is the United States and the rebels are the Viet Cong, right? Like he's said that, right?
No,
But he's also friends, with John Milius, who is like,
I mean,
I don't know, kill the commies.
Newt Gunray is like a combination of Newt Gingrich and Ronald Reagan, right? Like,
is that real? I
Yeah.
actually did not know that. Wow.
yeah, because like Gunray is Reagan backwards, like it's Reagan with the
George Lucas so fucking much. What a guy. Just what a beautiful.
yeah. I mean,
I think so.
I mean, he also made it like a weird Asian pastiche, so there's two sides of that coin, right? Like so.
Oh God, and they're like the bankers. They're like, oh, like the people have called George Lucas anti-Semitic because the idea, I guess, is that the banking group, like the intergalactic bankers who are part of the Confederacy, right? One of the core constituencies of the Confederacy is this like intergalactic banking council, and it's run by people who I guess are vaguely coded to be Jewish. This is the accusation. I don't think it has any merit, obviously. It's just like, oh God, yeah. George Lucas might be my favorite filmmaker of all time. Like, like obviously my favorite director is like Denis Villeneuve, and I think he makes like good. I don't know, probably Steven Spielberg is my favorite of all time. But just like the in terms of a filmmaker in a broad, director, producer, just kind of doing all these different things, like George Lucas, just what a guy, what a fucking guy.
Yeah. No, I mean, I find that like drawing those direct parallels just kind of like takes something away from the movies, right? Like the worst thing I ever heard was that, have you ever seen Howl's Moving Castle by Hayao Miyazaki?
Yeah.
That the king was supposed to just be George Bush, like George W. Bush, like straight up, like he's just like a bumbling idiot, and that's what like.
This humor reminds me of his Ari Aster and not Hereditary. What's the other one? The one that I liked a lot, Midsummer. I saw Midsummer. Midsummer was an amazing film. I think Midsummer was this is like real death of the author shit. Like Midsummer was such a good movie, and I was like, wow, there are like so many fucking levels to this. Holy shit, what a fucking movie. And then I went and I listened because I wanted to hear what he had to say. I listened to a whole interview. It was like an hour and a half interview. This guy talks about his movie, and it's the stupidest basic level zero shit. It's like I was listening. It's like a seventh grader wrote a book report on the movie Midsummer. It was like that level of analysis of his own movie that he made, which like, oh my God, which like is such a fucking frustrating thing. This is actually honestly part of why I like, this is one of the reasons why I really like Zack Snyder. Because when he talks about his movies, the way that like you would expect Plato to talk about the Republic. He thinks he is making the greatest art of all time. You know what I mean? He's like assigning this level of like meaning and like portent to just like and it's just like, buddy, this is a fucking Superman movie. Right? Like he talks about he does an interview. He does an hour and a half long interview where he talks about he's talking about Man of Steel. It's like with some podcast or whatever. And he talks about how Superman commits genocide because at the end of the movie, him and Zod are the only Kryptonians left, and Zod has forced his hand to such a point where not only is Superman committing murder, he's committing genocide. He's killing the the remnants of the Kryptonian race. And I was just like, damn, I had never thought of that. What a fucking real ass thing to say for this director on a podcast. Ari Aster over here is like, this is a movie about a breakup. And I was just like, kill me.
Oh man.
Oh.
I feel like both of those things annoy me in very different ways. Like my mind immediately wants to go to like that doesn't match the definition of genocide, which is probably a thing that's a little too hot for right now.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's just on one end you kind of have like over, like the over importance of it, right? Like the you have on one hand you have a director who's insisting the window shades are blue because of all of this other stuff, and you're just like, man, oh my god. And then on the other hand you have a director who just is just like, oh, they're blue because blue's a pretty color, and I'm just like, tell me. Letting directors talk about their movies is a fucking mistake, man. That's what I'm getting at.
Oh man. So I don't think this is the film my brother was director of photography on, EFIS, has premiered to pretty good reviews actually at Directors Fortnight. But I saw it at a screening, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I was like, oh, this is kind of like Bowling Alone, right? There's like it's about a rec baseball league, right? And I'm like I see a lot of this in there, and then like somebody in the audience at the screening that I'm at asks a question because the reason it's the last game in the field is because it's being demolished to build a school, and like somebody asks a question about these old men need to like get out of the way for like the school to be built, right? And like the director kind of like is like, yeah, I guess, right? Like, but like it's kind of like, oh gosh, it's like it's like such a dump, there's so much more here, right? I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the idea of like a level 0 take is something that is like in my brain recently, just because I feel like I'm seeing a lot of level 0 sort of like analysis about stuff, right? And it's funny because like the genesis for all of this, I guess we're kind of getting into our back half slip.
Sure.
The genesis for all of this is a guy was on a podcast, somebody was on a podcast, and they were having like a really in-depth conversation about sort of they were having this like really deep in-depth conversation about the nature of geopolitics and all this other sort of stuff, right? And then somebody and it was getting into the weeds. It was getting into the real nitty-gritty of stuff and saying, oh, well, this is why people are having a back and forth. It's kind of like a real debate, right? And then at like the very fucking end of it, somebody brings out this flow chart and is like, well, here's why all this whole thing ties back to George Soros, right? And it like becomes the final like 10 minutes of it becomes this conspiracy theory about how because George Soros puts money, like gives money to this foundation, and that foundation gives money to this charity, and that charity gives money to this, right? Really, he's funding, he's writing the checks for like these like fucking like protesters or whatever. It's just like the most, and this is like level 0. It's just like, come on, like think harder. Think harder about any of this. That like
the problem with that stuff is that they're thinking too hard, right? It's like they are like making the leap to like connect 3 extra dots to bring it all back to like whatever.
What's funny is it's this phrase that I like. The idea, it's called Occam's needle. It's sort of like Occam's razor, but it's Occam's needle. Occam's needle is to me like the antidote to this level of thinking, right? If George Soros was writing checks to fucking whoever, right? Where's wouldn't we just see the evidence for that, right? Let's say we're doing this at a certain amount of scale, and say 1,000 people are receiving checks. George fucking Soros, you don't think one of those people would leak one of those? Like somebody would just put that on their TikTok. They would put it on their Twitter.
Got
page.
My Soros bucks, right? Like
exactly.
Or got my what's the mirror organization? Coke. Got my Koch brothers bucks, right? Like same thing. Right?
Yeah, exactly, right? And the reason you call this Occam's needle is because it pops the balloon, right? You know, somebody is drumming up this conspiracy theory, blowing more and more hot air into the balloon, and you just Occam's needle the like the balloon, and it just like immediately kind of like pops or whatever. Anyway, so this is all a long way to say that Furiosa is a really good movie. We should watch it because George Miller is just as good as he was 10 years ago with Mad Max Fury Road. I don't even want to talk about it more, a whole episode on it, but man, it's funny, you've been watching it. I feel like I haven't seen all that much like marketing material for it.
They have a lot of ads on X, formerly known as Twitter,
Mm.
which is where
Okay, fair enough.
I've been seeing a ton of it.
Yeah, like I watched the trailers, just because I knew I was like interested in this. It just happened to come out the weekend of our anniversary, so I was like, hey, let's go watch Furiosa. And the funny thing is that Rachel didn't want to watch it. I don't know, like Fury Road was a really good movie. It was this contained kind of capsule. I don't need more than that, right? Like I don't want more than that. We don't need to like turn this whole thing into like the franchiseification, which I would probably agree with to a certain extent if it weren't for the fact that it is like George Miller and that he like wanted to, you know what I mean? Like if a filmmaker tells me I want to make a follow-up to this movie and this is what it's going to be and all this other sort of stuff, I'm going to probably be much more on board with that than I am with some version of like we're turning it into a we're turning it
Mattel
into a
wants to do a
franchise.
toy
And
cinematic universe because Barbie was so good, right? Like, yeah.
yeah, and even if like there's definitely some stuff like fucking did I ever tell you about Transformers Rise of the Beasts and how the end of that movie the kid gets recruited by GI Joe
Yes,
or
you did mention
whatever.
this.
Like that is I want to know what that means just because this is all stupid. I kind of just want to see the ridiculousness. This is sort of like the way that people will celebrate the beginning of the Dark Universe. Do you ever see those tweets where people will retweet that Twitter account is still there and it's like welcome to the Dark Universe? It'd be like happy Dark Universe Day 8 years later or something like that. Oh God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of along some of the lines of what we were talking about. We've been watching Clone Wars, the Clone Wars. It's titled still titled Derps Talk About Food. Thank you for letting me know. Thank you. No, not anymore. Yeah, I've been updating the actual title part, but I haven't been updating the right side of the bar that says some Derps Talk About Games. But we've been watching the Clone Wars, and as we've been watching it, kind of similar to what we're talking about, there's like a surprising amount of war crimes, right? Like by both sides. Like it's just kind of like just again stuff that's been in the news, right? So it's like
Yeah.
like one of them does a thing where like I think it's either Anakin or Obi-Wan is like basically feigns being injured to like lure somebody in, and they capture some bad guys that way. I'm like, that's a war crime, right? Like, isn't that a war crime? But then like the Confederate Alliance or whatever they're called will go and do something worse. It's like, okay, it's fine. There's no Geneva Convention in space, but like just like the level of kind of like that's war crimes.
It makes sense, right? Like the genesis of this are World War II propaganda series, right? And the Geneva Conventions come after, right? Like
That's responsible what happened during World War II. Yeah.
Yeah. So like you can understand why, I mean, there's some stuff that like the thing I like about the Clone Wars is its ability to kind of like harness like the sort of I can't believe I'm saying this, the fun of war, right? The heroic nature of a fighter pilot who shoots down the enemy ace, right? Or the bravery of a soldier who is hiding out behind enemy, like behind enemy lines or something like that. Like you can tell all of those kinds of stories in pretty uncomplicated ways in Star Wars, just because like on one side you have clones who don't have humanity, and on the other side you have bots who don't have humanity, and you can just kind of like massacre them without any second thought, essentially.
Well, it's like you do get a little bit out of the bots are jokes, right? They go Roger, Roger, and you shoot them, right? The clones, like, it's actually a really cheap way to get like I'm probably gonna use the wrong
Oh,
word. Maybe
pathos.
pathos. Yeah, maybe that's the right one.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you give them a name like Speedy or like Feet or something, right? And then you kill them, and it's like, no, not Feet. He was my favorite, right? Like,
Yeah, because there's Rex, right, and
well,
Cody.
I would say Rex and Cody are persistent, right?
Okay, yeah.
But like within an episode, they'll be like, this is like Sixes and Bill and and like Teddy, right? And like you'll just kill Sixes, right? And be like, no, and you'll never see you'll never see that character again, right? Like, but and they're all the same voice actor, right? So it feels like it's like a character kind of dying.
Quentin Tarantino in the chat. Feet. No. Speaking of Quentin Tarantino, I actually rewatched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It might be my new favorite Tarantino movie, to be honest with you.
I'm gonna rewatch that one.
I didn't realize how good it was on a rewatch. The first one, the first time I watched it, right, like I didn't know where any of this was going, right? I was pretty in the dark on all of this stuff. I'm never getting over Mango deciding a lovable, expendable guy's name is V. It was pretty weird, Mango. It's weird that your mind went there. Okay, that's all I'm saying.
My mind went to Rex, but I was like, I can't say Rex because that's like an actual character name, right?
Yeah, it's a real character. What's the opposite of Rex? Feet. Oh my god. Okay. Jesus Christ, that's funny. Okay. I don't even remember what I was fucking saying. Yeah, but yeah, watching it again, watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood again, I was really struck by how good I thought it was. I just love everything. I just love everything. I love everybody in that movie. Honestly, the character who stood out to me this time was Al Pacino's. Was Al Pacino's character, who's this like producer. He's the guy who lays out that, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio's character Jake Cahill is getting cast as villains for new westerns because they want to see the new good guy to show Jake getting like killed or whatever. I'm sorry, I think Jake is the name of the character. I can't remember the name of the actual actor, like what his actor name is in the movie or whatever. And so, it's the idea that like, you wheel out the former star of a previous Western and then you have your guy shoot him, right? Because it kind of like makes you like cool, whatever. And you can just like see how much this like unravels. It's just like unravels his whole existence. And he would eventually, spaghetti and all this other sort of stuff. But just like, I loved all of that. Brad Pitt is so good in that movie. Brad Pitt is truly a great actor who doesn't seem he fits the profile for a bad actor, but he's like a great actor in a way, right? Um and he's just so good in this. He's so good. Cliff Booth is like the kind of character that I feel like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood could end up on like college fresh room dorm walls, like Pulp Fiction ended up on college fresh room dorm, like we went to school or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to give it the shout out.
It has that quality, like we were talking about earlier. It has that quality of being like a very Quentin Tarantino movie, but like not so much that it feels like a parody, right? Like it still holds it together.
Yeah.
Hey, what else? I watched
How's Sopranos? You're halfway through the second season of Sopranos?
Yeah, before I get to that, I do want to say that I watched one episode of Bridgerton and decided it was anime for white women and didn't watch it again.
I have heard that I would like Bridgerton. I have learned from friends of mine, they say that I would really enjoy Bridgerton, that I should watch it.
Might like it's not unwatchable. My girlfriend was very into just watched the first half of the newest season and thought it was not up to snuff. There's also some stuff where like some very particular things, like we were talking about CG. The opening of the show is CG, and it's like this god awful CG that like it's using like it's like a piano clipping through like it's supposed to be like an effect where like the piano comes out of like the branch of a tree, but it's literally just like clipping through the branch of the tree. It's like drove me nuts. I like watched it once. I'm like, I can't anymore. Um,
Okay.
uh, but it's it was okay, but not a thing for me. But I would
Do you like romances? Do you get on board for like a good romance?
depends. Like I won't get it. I'm not a fan of the genre, right? Like I'll get on board for I watched my girlfriend made me watch Emma, which is based on I think a Jane Austen
Yep,
novel.
that's a Jane Austen novel.
And I liked that quite a bit. It was according to my girlfriend who is the historian, very period accurate. And so I enjoyed that, but like I
So
am
was it a, because I know there have been a number of adaptations. Is it the movie Emma, or
yes
is there a
the movie Emma.
okay?
Um, and I mean, I have been watching Outlander, even though it's that like if you had to say to me, if you said to me which is a better show, Bridgerton or Outlander, the answer is probably Bridgerton. I prefer Outlander. Um,
Okay.
uh, but it's it is what it is. But The Sopranos, which I am I love at this point, right? It's a great show. Thank you for endlessly haranguing me to watch it. Thank you to all of my friends out there who are endlessly haranguing me to watch it. I have. It's funny every time I watch an episode, like for the next like couple of days, like I've been walking around the house saying "Madon," like I've been getting in touch with like my yeah, Sopranos anime for white men, Sopranos anime for Italian Americans, right? Like
Yep.
it is like there is so much in that that's just kind of like if I ever have a kid and I want to explain to him what my childhood was like, I will show him an episode of The Sopranos, right? Like, um, minus the mob stuff. I have no mob connections. But like, I also just like. It is amazing to me how much I hate like every character in that show besides like AJ and Carmela, maybe. Um, like everyone's terrible, right? Like even the fun ones, like Paulie Walnuts. Every time he does the thing where he's like, "You hear what I said?" and he repeats what he just said. I want to like strangle him through the screen. But like it's compelling and it's great and it's I'm connecting with it in a way that I didn't think I would, and it's man, it's so much drama, right? Like it is so good. Like I can't wait to like so. We're at, what was the episode we just watched is the one where um Meadows' friend's father goes and plays in Tony's elite game.
Poker game. Oh my god, yeah. Holy shit, that episode is rough.
Yeah, and and he ends up taking his son's car to pay back Tony, and it ends up like falling like it ends up turning back on him, just like Jesus Christ. And I like Richie Aprile and Janice are like my current most hated characters in the show, and I can't wait to see how that gets dealt with, right?
Janice is the worst. Janice is so awful.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, like the people say like the true villain of the show is what the fuck is Tony's mother's name?
Oh, Livia.
Livia, like the villain of Sopranos is Livia, which is true, right? Like Livia is like pretty fucking awful, but Janice is like the Scrappy Doo of that show. She's like the most annoying character, right? Like she's not a villain, right? Like she's not like she's not like like a character who I'm like rooting to hate. It's just like she's so fucking got her voice and just like every dumb needly evil thing. I want to fucking like she's awful, right? Richie Aprile is the villain, right? And I want Richie Aprile to like fucking die because he's like whatever, huge dick to Tony all the time, right? Even if Tony is awful and all these other sorts of things. Like Janice is just just like stepping on a Lego.
Yeah, and like the way the way like Tony reacts to her is just kind of like I feel it. I feel it in my bones. In the chat, Rachel says anime for Italian Americans just made me think of like instead of Tony saying he wants some gabagool, he dubs it with a cheeseburger like they do in the Yu-Gi-Oh dub. Yes, absolutely. All the guns are people pointing fingers. Yeah.
Honestly, the most real thing I think in all of The Sopranos is how Tony will sometimes walk to the refrigerator in the morning and pull a piece of like he'll just like pull a piece of gabagool out and he'll just eat it, right? Like that is like that's like the most authentic thing I think I've ever seen like in The Sopranos. But speaking of HBO shows that are mildly authentic from the mid 2000s,
The Wire.
I'm sorry, you were about to say something?
Oh yeah, so I was gonna say as a response to this thing that Rachel says, I'm just imagining Tony looking at looking at like Richie and being like, I'm gonna send you to the Shadow Realm, Richie. But you know, that's because for people who don't know, famously in the Yu-Gi-Oh! 4 Kids dub, in the original, they would just kill people, but the Shadow Realm was like the safe for work for the PG-13 version of that. But anyway, you were gonna say, are you talking about The Wire? Is that
No, we're talking about Entourage, baby.
okay.
I have been watching Entourage. I don't know why. I was on Max for some reason and it popped up and I was like, oh, I watched this a couple years ago. I remember really liking it at the time. Not really liking it. I liked it just fine, right? It's honestly been pretty hard to watch again. It's funny. People will talk about Sex in the City for dudes, right? Like Sex in the City for like the male Sex in the City. Entourage is the male Sex in the City, right? It is Sex in the City for guys. Like like 1-to-1 essentially, right? In the sense of you're living vicariously through this character. The main group of like four guys, they all have different sort of like personalities and they're always like going out and doing whatever, and there's all this like drama. It's set in LA instead of New York, and obviously it's built around kind of like Hollywood stuff, and like instead of like built around like the New York media scene, right? But like very in line with like both of these shows are doing the exact same thing. One of them is for women, the other is for men. But the thing that I'm having a hard time with Entourage, at the time, I remember Entourage feeling very relatable in the sense that my friend groups looked a lot like the friend groups of the core main guys in Entourage, right? Which is you have Vincent Chase, he's the movie star. You have his manager Eric, who is the like straight man, down to earth, right? Like making the reasonable sort of decisions. And then you have these kind of like two comic relief characters, Turtle, his driver, who's like big New York energy, wears backwards baseball caps, has chin strap beard, is just like the worst like 2000s like caricature of like a frat guy. And then Johnny Drama, who is Vincent's older brother, who is a failed actor essentially, right? Like the kind of actor who just gets like bit parts on TV shows and is like constantly trying to like find work while his brother is like signing multi-million dollar deals, right? And then the breakout character from Entourage was always Jeremy Piven playing Ari Gold, who is a who's like a high-powered Hollywood agent, right? And quite a lot of the show kind of like is built around his sort of like his business and the ins and outs of his agency and all that stuff. Which I appreciate, which I love. Ari is a pretty fun, is a pretty fun like character or whatever. But like the thing I didn't quite realize, these guys are so mean to each other. They are just like constant. Do you know what I mean? And the thing, and my hypothesis is, I just have a better friend group now. Like I have a healthier friend group where like I can talk to one another and be positive and engage in like positive ways where I am feeling like like I feel like I love my friends, right? Entourage is a show about these four guys who are constantly shitting on each other all the time, making jokes at one another's expense or whatever. And it was like, I was wild to me that I was like, wow, this is really fucking relatable, right? And the thing I was thinking is, I was just like, was that just like what our friend group was like in our mid 20s?
No,
And it was like you, me, and Zhao and Charles, and we're also constantly all talking shit. Like,
no, there is a thing where like And then obviously this is based in stereotypes that like,
Mm.
men will shit on each other, but like, have each other's backs when the chips are down, whereas like women will be nice to each other and then like, talk about each other behind each other's backs, right? Like, I don't know how true that is on the larger scale, but like, I feel like that's what that's playing into, right? And
Yeah, I feel like that's like playing into, yeah, for sure.
um, and I know that like, I have some of that, right? Like in my life, and you know, um, it's in ways that go beyond like the shitting on level, right? Like I have, Zhao, for instance, and I have been truly vicious to each other at some points in like our various internet chats, and I was like the best man at his wedding, right? So like, there's
Yeah.
like, um, uh, there's a level of kind of like when things matter, things change, but I get that. Oh no, not to say that makes it good or anything, but like I definitely feel. I think it's also just part of like getting older, where like it's less about kind of like the ribbing and more kind of about like the stuff that's it's the stuff that's important, right? Not to like wax philosophical or anything, but
Yeah,
I think
sure.
it's just the way it goes, right? Like
I also there's also a part of me that thinks like Turtle and Johnny Drama are like truly the butts of the joke quite a lot of the time. They're both pretty awful with like women or whatever and all this other sort of thing. And I think that the show kind of like gets that, right? Because like really the show is built around in my opinion like Eric, this the he is the straight man glue that holds everything together, but like he is not taking advantage of women. He has strong kind of like real relationships, and like nobody else understands him. They all call him pussy whipped all the time. But like I think the show is ultimately kind of on Eric's side about like love and romance and how to interact with women and stuff like that, right? Even if the wilder characters are the ones who are I don't know. Yeah. It's wild. I don't know how much I'm gonna keep watching it. It's just kind of like there in the background, and it's just an easy. That's just like an easy thing to like put on when I'm playing, Total War or Pandaria Remix or something.
makes sense. Yeah. No, I mean, I would say on the game side, I've been playing Street Fighter and Pandaria Remix, and
How
the
deep in Pandaria Remix are you?
level 63. I haven't been like pushing it super hard. Just kind of like it's I hit the buttons. I shoot it. I shoot the arrow because I'm a hunter. Hooray! Um,
I am pretty deep in it. I've been level 7. I got level 70 a couple of days, after it launched. It's wild to me that there's still 80 days left in this event because it feels like I'm almost done with it, right? Um I got all the mounts or whatever, so I've started like upgrading the gear, which is actually pretty fun because now I feel like I am like truly crushing, like these raid bosses with just like insane amounts of damage or whatever. And I imagine that in a couple of pretty similar when we get down into it. It's funny how much like Pandaria Remix has taken over sort of like my life and our friends, right? Like we had the new season, we had season 4, and we were running dungeons, and then Pandaria Remix came out 2 weeks after season 4 launched, and I haven't run a key since, right? Like
yeah, no, fair. And like I'm just jumping into my character to like do the stuff I want to finish up. Like I'm basically doing getting relic pieces so I can get like the sets out of the archaeologist stuff, and like slowly working on my my actual year. Like a week ago I broke 1,000,000 gold for the first time, so I feel special.
for the first time.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um, I've been like past for like Shadowlands. I was like in 6,700,000s for a while, and I just kept like going up, and then I'd like have to like buy like a new legendary and go back down to like 600 or whatever. And then honestly, the thing that put me over the top was like that first week I got like 3 BOEs, and it's like okay, I made like a couple 100,000 off of that. Uh, the most condescending wow I've ever heard. I know, but what did you say, buddy? Buddy said I don't get out of bed for less than 100,000 gold in Shadowlands or something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, those markets a little bit harder to control now. I assume with like the combined market and also the way the order system works, right? Like you
I
can't.
don't think I'm ever going to be able to make my like the money I made during Shadowlands is like that's it. I just kind of have to like live off of the dividends of my 17 million gold at the end of the end of Shadowlands and the legendary mark.
Yeah, makes sense. You know, Street Fighter patch is good. Zangief is stronger. I'm happy. I haven't played it quite enough of it to like really have strong opinions on it. The biggest thing is that everybody has a wake up drive reversal now, which kind of lets you. It's like a get off me thing. That's like it's got counterplay, so it's not like a I win button, but it's great for kind of like getting out of the corner in bad situations. So
That's cool.
yeah, yeah. Uh,
Yeah, I've just been playing, I've been playing Remix, but I've also been playing a lot of Total War and a lot of Battlegrounds. Battlegrounds has been super fun. I've been playing duos, but then I've also just kind of like been playing some sort of like singles. It's wild. I've actually gone on something of a winning streak recently where I just keep getting first place in Battlegrounds, and there's just like the thing that Battlegrounds does so well. I guess this is like an auto chess thing, but I don't know if other auto chess games can hit this in the way that Battlegrounds does. Um, in Battlegrounds, I will make these small decisions that will win me games, and I feel like the smartest fucking person on the planet. So, for instance, when you're playing Murlocs, there's a unit. It's called, I don't even remember what it's called, but it's a 5/2 Murloc that has venomous. So when it deals damage to a target, that target dies, but only the first target, right? It's kind of like death touch, but just once. And then when it dies, it has a death rattle that it'll give venomous to another. It'll give venomous to another Murloc. And so I was running Murlocs, and I ran Murloc into I ran Murlocs like into beasts. And beasts right now are built around doing a lot of self damage where they're pinging themselves for 1 damage, and then there's a bunch of stuff that'll buff your guys based on that, and you make these huge gigantic hydras. The hydra said when a friendly beast takes damage, it gets +1/+1 or whatever. And I did this thing where I put my venomous Murloc like 5th in my order, and I was just like, you know what, like I think what's going to happen is the first couple of attacks I'm just going to chew away at these little guys, and it's going to get me like the 1 in 3 to snipe the hydra with the with the venomous Murloc or whatever. And I did it, and I got him with it, and it just like felt so good because it's planting and payoff, right? Like you make that decision, but then you have the tension of, oh my god, is this going to be good enough? Am I going to win? Right? I don't know. Well, we have to see. I have to wait all that time to watch all of the attacks kind of play out. But that's just like it's such a satisfying, right? I was doing it similarly against a dragons build, because one of the things that makes dragons very strong is divine shield. Divine shield, negates the first instance of damage. So the way you play dragons is you give them a ton of attack and divine shield so that their first attack hits for like 600, but they only have 17 health or something like that. So they only have like 17 health, so they'll immediately die to the counterattack, and it's the divine shield that saves their lives. And I was up against this dragon guy, and I picked up I just like picked up like a level 2 minion, just like a minion nobody fucking uses, that deals 1 or 2 damage to everything. Just it deals 1 damage to the kind of thing, which pops all of the divine shields. And so I was just like, it's just stuff like that, like being able to like make a cool play, and win. That's what Battlegrounds is all about. Total War, I don't even know what's going on with Total War. I loaded up, my turns are taking forever. I'm in the late game on like 4 different games or something, and I'm just kind of I don't know. I'm just kind of like going for it. It's hard to hate. It's just hard to hate Total War. It's such an easy thing to just like, as soon as I boot it up to play, it immediately soaks up 20 or 30 minutes of my time, like a sponge.
Makes sense. No, I totally feel that. Um, I have not been playing any game like that recently, just because I've been stuck in other things. But I kind of miss some of that stuff sometimes.
So what ended up happening with Diablo?
I
Is
never
it
played
just
it.
off?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
yeah.
friend of the cast, Monik, has been playing it, and he says it's great. But friend of the cast, Monik, also told me that he is going to make me play the new Destiny expansion, like Beyond Light or whatever it's called, or Lightfall or something like that, when it comes out in like I guess a week from this point. So, that's the next thing on my horizon, I guess.
Okay.
But basically that's everything I have. But do you have anything else you want to talk about?
You know what? I don't think I have anything else I wanna.
All All right. Well, in that case, if you have, if you want to email us with any things you saw on this podcast, you can email us at derpsgames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsgames.com. Follow us at twitch.tv/derpsgames or youtube.com/@somederpsgames. All links down in the description. Rate, review us on iTunes, all that stuff. We are fast approaching episode 400, so get your questions in. That's everything I have. But do you have anything else you look to promote?
I have nothing else that I'm looking to promote.
All right. Well, in that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.